Okay, perfect. So yeah, as Peter mentioned, my name is Carelle Mang-Benza. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Western Ontario, and today I'd like to talk about some of the things that catch my attention in the current transition to renewable energy, often called the clean energy transition. But first of all, I'd like to tell you about where I sit. So I acknowledge that my university, Western University, is located on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples. And these people are Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaran nations. And the lands on which this university is located are connected to several treaties, agreements signed between European settlers in the 16th, 17th centuries and indigenous people. One of such treaties is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. And it's an interesting, I found it fascinating because it has three basic rules. The first rule in this agreement, called the Dish with One Spoon, says take only what you need. The second rule is leave some for somebody else. And the third rule is keep it clean. Three basic rules that were to legislate how the European settlers and the indigenous people would share of the common pool of resources that they had, that the indigenous people were willing to share with the settlers. Three basic rules, and they're so simple compared to the swath of concepts and theories that we all come across in our work in energy transition. And there are many of those concepts and theories and ideas, but I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm not even try to summarize them. I'm going to talk to um, just a few of what I call the shades, some of the shades, the aspects, the things that catch my interest. I will start with my own research, so that's me. Then I will move to talk a little bit about the paper that Peter mentioned that got his attention, apparently. And then we'll talk about some events in the energy sphere, what I call the energy verse, this is the they, and we'll close with implications that I hope will resonate with all of us. So let's start with my current research. My current research is a blend. It sits at the intersection of three strands of literature: community wind energy, energy transition, and indigenous political ecology. So I'm going to talk to you about the actual project that spurred the interest for this bigger research project, at least for my research project, because my own project is part of a bigger project that involves Canada, um, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and two provinces in Canada and Northern Ireland. But my particular project, the project I'm working on, is a small wind project, 4 megawatt, that is located in Northern Ontario, and that has been operating. The turbines has have been spinning since 2012. What is unique about that case is it's one of the very few wind project in Canada that is fully owned by a an indigenous community. So the indigenous community that I'm partnering with in my project fully owns and operates their wind turbines since 2012. But examining this particular project required me to look at a bigger picture. So, picture in the province, picture in the country. So, what is that bigger picture? Well, if you look at the province of Ontario, where I live, um, there has been an exponential growth of wind power since last decade, since the mid 2000. In effect, since 2014, Ontario, the province of Ontario, is coal free. So there's no more energy generated for electricity, no more electricity generated from coal since 2014. But the process of phasing out coal started last decade. Hence, the need for substitute energy sources. And that's how wind became so popular. So that growth of wind power allowed a number of communities, indigenous and non-indigenous, to join in and host wind farms or wind turbines. The case of that particular the particular case I'm working on is unique because, as I said, this indigenous community fully owns the project. But there's an even bigger context, which is what here in Canada, we call the Project of Reconciliation. And it's an initiative led by the federal government, the current federal government, to improve the relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. Why? Because over centuries of colonization, those relationships have been tarnished. So this is the whole picture I'm looking at when I'm attending to that particular 4 megawatt wind project. And as I said, it takes me, so because of this broader context, it takes me to blend three bodies of literature that may or may not necessarily talk to each other in general. So first, community wind energy, because that's the core of the work. And when I talk about community wind energy, I talk about the literature that examines social acceptance of renewable energy and of turbines in particular. It takes me to think about aspects of process and outcome. Those aspects are often referred to as procedural justice and distributional justice. But because there is that broader context in Canada and globally, actually, I also have to engage with the literature on energy transition, a literature that looks at structural changes in energy system. Essentially, what is an energy system? It's a combination of hard and soft. So the hard is all the technologies, the infrastructure, whereas the soft aspects refer to behaviors, people, acceptance and perceptions of people, all of that, the institutions, the policy, the discourse, all of that is captured under the soft aspects of energy system. But again, because of the particular project I work with, I have to engage with Indigenous political ecology, a strand of political ecology that pays attention to the past and the present. The past is, those colonial projects that sought to erase, to eliminate Indigenous identity and blend them in new forms of societies. But there's also present legacy of this colonial past, and that takes me to examine the forms that Indigenous people and communities use to reassert their identity. So all of that is part of my work, all those topics. So if I were to summarize those topics, it's about, I daily deal with, of course, Indigenous um, concerns for self-determination, but also energy justice, and sometimes these connect. Energy transition, restoration, rebuilding of those communities that have been marginalized for too long. And and if I have to really spend time to think, if I were to distill all of that, I would say ultimately justice is the compelling reason for me to attend to Indigenous experience in renewable energy and in this clean energy transition. So energy justice is also what drew me to sway a little bit and start writing this other paper that Peter talked about, the paper called Many Shades of Pink. And I'm going to talk about this particular paper briefly now. So the paper was published earlier this year in Energy Research and Social Science, and it speaks to I would say two main things: gender blindness and the life cycle of clean energy. So this is the paper here. The the I have to say, I started the paper by observing gender blindness. I'm not the first one. Many authors have noted that, and some of them will be speaking in the next few weeks. It's something that caught my attention, and I realized there is, in fact, gender blindness in energy policy, in also energy planning. Traditionally, energy policy makers and researchers have been gender blind, so they've been focusing on issues of cost, technology, um, resource availability, transmission, all of those technical issues, overlooking the people, oftentimes overlooking the people that benefit or not from energy services. And it's been that gender blindness is observed both in the global north and in the global south, with a slight difference. In the global north, energy experts often think and hold the belief that, well, energy is a gender neutral field because men and women, everyone has equal access to energy, which is not true, and which is increasingly being established as not being true. In the global south, the fact that there are more obvious pockets of access deficit, of more obvious places where energy is not readily available and where women bear the brunt of that access deficit. In the global south, yeah, energy experts say, well, yeah, it's gender, there are gender differences, but it's mostly in rural settings, not in urban. In cities, pretty much the same, which again is not true. So in this paper, I wanted to look at two directions, to look at the issue in two ways. First, I wanted to look at women's agency in the clean energy transition, meaning the transition to renewable energy. And I also wanted to examine the impact of that transition on their lives. So I decided to focus on four subsystems, to split the energy system in four systems. It's an approach that is often used to look at subsystem as a way to differentiate what's happening in a more granular way. So I didn't collect my own data. I used published case studies that talk to experiences of women and that was I was fortunate to find 8 published case studies from Africa, Asia, Europe, and Americas, North and South America. And as I said, I separated the subsystems. So I picked 2 cases from extraction, energy extraction, mineral extraction, then 2 cases in production, 2 in distribution, and 2 in consumption. And then I conducted a thematic analysis. And the themes I was interested in include participation, women's role, um, gender equality, the impact of certain energy choices on women's lives, all of that. So I wanted to loom large and include as much as possible. But in the end, what I found is as I was looking at women's, as the descriptions of those women's lived experiences with renewable energy, I found that their agency remained local. So they were confined to their community of place, whether it's the village, the district, or community of interest when they were involved in cooperative, energy cooperatives. But they were, in all cases, all these 8 cases, these women remain separated from the global system, the global structures, the centers of power. Uh, and again, both in the global south and in the global north, one of the cases of extraction is about coltan mining in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And there's a number of women who join in the mining of coltan to improve their livelihoods. But they as although they learn to navigate the traditional, both the traditional mining circles and the modern mining circles where mining companies are um, settling down and operating, they remain side stakeholders they remain on the margin. The core center, they never really connect to the centers of power. In the other case of where that was very visible was in Germany. So women are becoming stakeholders in energy cooperatives. But the observation that the author made in that case is that, well, they are stakeholders, but they are limited in the number of shares they can buy because of the gender gap in the wage gap in Germany. And again, it goes back to historical roles that women had. And so they are able, there's no restrictions for them to become stakeholders, but they're struggling to increase their shares, and they're also struggling to reach decision making position, to reach leadership position. And that's one observation. In all those cases I looked at, the women's agency remains local. Yes, you can participate, but up to a certain point. The other observation I made looking at these case studies is what I call the womenness as usual. So yes, they participate, and it's connected to the first point. Um, so we see situations where inequities are perpetuated. There is no real disruptions of the patriarchal structures. There is, yeah, you join in, and we can even count you and make sure that there's enough of you to check that box. But there's no actual disruption of the structures that led to inequities in the first place, and that caused those inequities to remain. So what I argue in the paper is that disrupting those structures, require more than participation. Participation is not enough. What will make an actual difference will be that women get to the point where they can steer the course of that clean energy transition. What I mean by steering is actually getting to the places where they can make the decisions and inform the design of the energy system before the system is rolled out, not wait until the systems are rolled out and then kind of sit in and participate and wait to be invited. So it's easier said than done. One area that could make that happen is through policy, and policy. As women get to leadership roles in policy making, they can actually steer the course, because they'll be able to spot things and identify things that would not be identified otherwise. I have to say that this paper looks at um, men and women. There's no, I did not go into a full gender analysis. So it was an exploratory paper that was really intended to break down the energy system and go beyond um, the the practice of just counting how many women get renewable job. I wanted to have a more granular look at what was actually happening at different sites of the energy system. So again, if you're interested, you have the references and you can check it out. But now I'd like to move to recent events. Um, Again, there are many shades, many um, aspects of this energy transition, and just at what really for me is a red thread is the aspect of justice. It is the thing that connects my own research with indigenous-led renewable energy and this parallel interest in gender and energy. And it's using that same lens of justice that I examine recent events. And I'm going to speak to four in particular. So I'm going to speak to the recent report from the International Energy Agency on net zero. Then I'm going to briefly talk about letters that were sent by CEOs and CSOs. Then talked about, and not even talk about, I'm going to skim through the UN High Energy Dialogue and close with um, some remarks on the World Energy Outlook that was just released 2 days ago. It almost didn't make it to this presentation. So first, the IEA report, the roadmap on net zero, that report was released in May this year. The report was requested from the International Energy Agency by COP26. So the COP starts in 2 days, three. And so that report has been called the world's first comprehensive study of how we can maneuver transition to a net zero energy system by 2050. The report is a very interesting read. It outlines how in almost decade by decade, humanity, all of us, can reach net zero by 2050. So it calls for an immediate stop in investment in new fossil fuel projects. So that's immediate now. The report says in order to get there in 2050, today, no more investment in new fossil fuel project. And it predicts that by 2040, following this roadmap, the global electricity sector would actually be able to achieve net zero. And all of that while ensuring um, energy supply, secure energy supply, maintaining economic growth and development worldwide. So it is a landmark report because it's the first time that net zero appears so clearly in publication of the International Energy Agency. One thing that comes out very strongly from the report is that renewable energy is key, is at the core of this net zero roadmap or scenario. So in this net zero scenario, CO2 emissions from renewable energy, from electricity generation, will fall to zero in before 2040. They may fall to zero later in developing countries, but globally, by 2030, electricity generated from renewables would represent 60% of all energy generated worldwide. So that's a big, it's 2030 is in 9 years. So we're talking about the threefold increase within almost, I mean, it's and almost to 2022 in 8 years. And by 2050, they predict that renewables will contribute to 90% of global energy generation. And the focus in renewables is really solar PV and wind with, some minor, smaller contributions from hydropower and bioenergy. But nuclear power remains significant, remains present until 2050. The actual contribution of nuclear energy will double, although it will remain below 10% in 2050. So that's a very interesting roadmap scenario. A month later, so the net zero report was released in May. A month later, CEOs of big companies joined in, and they called on the G7 and other world leaders to say, hey, we have a scenario, we have a roadmap. Please join in and give us clear policy signals, because we are ready to up our ambition. We are ready to do more. We are ready to be bold. So you government step up and give us a clear policy environment so we can do business. So that letter was written in June. In September, CSOs, civil society organization, wrote a letter this time to IEA, to the International Energy Agency, to say, yeah, we love the net zero scenario and the roadmap, but now we know that you're working on your World Energy Outlook, which is another landmark report that every year shows projections of energy supplies and kind of is the leading document for in the energy sphere. And so these this group of CSOs say, we want that net zero roadmap, the net zero scenario, to be the central scenario in the upcoming World Energy Outlook. We want but we want you to make it not just one scenario. We want it to be the core, the anchor scenario in that publication that you're working on. They also made referred in their letter to IEA as, maybe you may want to tone down what you say about carbon capture, fossil fuel. They were talking about natural gas that remains in the energy mix, and also maybe tone down the reliance on nuclear energy, which is a contentious topic. They also mention to ensure equity and justice with regard to the minerals, and we'll come back to the idea of the mineral sourcing and to extraction, and we'll see why it makes total sense to have that mentioned in the letter. So they wrote to IEA, so the civil society organization, over 100 of them wrote to IEA, and here it is. The report was later published, but before, a few weeks before, the World Energy Outlook, and a week after that letter from the CSO, the UN hosted a high level energy dialogue. And what I caught from this dialogue is that there was a quite a significant attendance of female leaders, women that are leaders in the energy field. So we had ministers of energy, and from the global north and the global south. So that's a sign of changing times. Um, and the UN dialogue was also interested because it navigates, it picked up on the language of net zero by 2050, but at the same time it kept the language of the SDG, so the Sustainable Development Goals, including, especially SDG 7, that is focused on energy. And it came back, one of the outcomes were those energy compacts where, national, local government, private corporations, um, NGOs can make commitments, in related to energy. They're voluntary commitments, so there's no binding, commitment, but they make voluntary commitment to make progress on the SDG 7. So all of that took place, but the language of the net zero by 2050 was a strong, it was woven into the dialogue. And now we come back to, that World Energy Outlook. So it was published just 2 days ago, I believe, 3 days ago. It came out, and one of um, the strong statement from this report is that a new energy economy is emerging. And I put on the slide just a quote from the report. So I'm not sure, and I haven't read the analysis yet to see if the CSOs are happy with the way the World Energy Outlook is came out. But there is that statement that the net zero scenario is a path, but it's not the only path. And I thought that was interesting. And I read it very briefly, so I don't want to venture too much into the analysis of that. Some other people will do that much better. But the report made it clear that there's a new energy economy in the making. And really that's where I think, um, we are all, concerned, because all these events I've just talked about, they seem to be, they're connected in some ways, and they seem to be just, new other events in the policy sphere, but they're all affecting us. And I want to now spend some time discussing how, in my view, we ought to pay attention to those events and the way they're unfolding, and the way that new energy economy is unfolding. And so that's us now. Um, Again, I think there are many, many shades, many, many things that we could be talking about, but I'd like to focus on two things. First, the energy life cycle. Again, something that really, for me, it's important to pay attention to that. And the other point is gender dimensions. So remember when I talked about the CSO letter, I mentioned that reference they had in the letter about the minerals and the mining of those minerals. This is one statement from the IEA report of May 2021, the report on net zero by 2050, the roadmap. And the report says, what you have on the slide, that the total market size of critical minerals, they predict, so it's a scenario, it's a prediction. They predict that the market size of critical minerals will grow sevenfold in the next decade because of the net zero pathway. As I said, the net zero pathway requires massive new investment in renewable, and it's mainly solar PV, but not solar PV and wind, but not only that. So it means that mining companies have new fields to explore, and that's significant in terms of business opportunities, because manufacturing solar panels, batteries, blades, turbine blades, all of that, and all the other pieces and components, that requires a significant amount of minerals, and some of those minerals are only found in certain places. They are critical minerals for this energy transition. And where are they found? Let's see that. And again, this is very basic. So I just put on the slide the three major producing countries of four of those minerals. I think there are actually 19 critical minerals, but just to speak to these four, so copper is found in Chile, Peru, and China. Chile is the biggest producer. Cobalt, DR Congo, holds 60% of world global reserves of cobalt. Manganese is mainly found in China, a little bit in South Africa and Australia. And rare earth metals, that's China, Vietnam, Brazil. So not a lot of countries. And what is interesting, you'll notice that none of these critical minerals are found in London, Paris, or Washington, D.C. So it begs a few questions. The other thing that you can find in that net zero report is this chart that I found speaks loudly. So you have the oil supply, so comparing the oil supply today in 2020 and what is projected by 2050. So as the oil supply and the oil demand diminishes, the share of renewables, and that's the, maybe I should, if I manage to use a pointer here, although I don't know if you're able to see my mouth, but the bars, sorry, the green bars represent the share of solar PV and wind. So by 2050, you see that massive, to the green, you need those critical minerals. And you see that the demand for the critical minerals is quite significant. So the projection for the next 3 decades is significant. There is actually a parallel report that the International Energy Agency released just on the role of critical minerals in the clean energy transition. Sorry, this is just my timer. I need to start wrapping up. And I found this illustration from a publication by Healy and colleagues, including Jenny Stevens, that you will listen to next week. And they examine in their paper from 2019, they examined the cross-border impact of the fossil fuel supply chain. They go from extraction to disposal through processing and transport and all of that. And what they show is that at consumption side, people rarely pay attention to what is happening upstream, especially what is happening in extraction zones. So it's another way, it's a similar way looking at the energy along a life cycle. But what I found interesting is that um, we may realize in a few years that this chart doesn't only apply to fossil fuel. And the worst situation to be in is to find ourselves by 2050 having to apply a very similar chart to the clean energy transition, where we would have sacrifice zones at extraction sites of those critical minerals that made the transition to clean energy possible. So this is one area that interests me, and I think it's something to keep, to keep a tab on. The other dimension is women in that net zero, on that net zero pathway. So I took a look at the net zero report released in May, and realized, and that's a very quick basic search, that gender is only mentioned once, whereas women is mentioned twice, only twice. So it's a big report, one mention of gender, two mention of women. And again, um, going back to those assumptions that traditional energy planners make, we get the that image, and I pulled out the three quotes. So um, and all three quotes make references to access deficit context, as if the only time we may want to talk about women and gender is for those access deficit, and that's the image. That's why I pulled out those images. So women carrying loads of wood, or they cooking with three stones, and carrying. I found it personally irritating, because I'm thinking, how long are we going to repeat the same conversation? Not that it doesn't happen, not that there's no access deficit context where biomass is used, where women are walking 7 hours a day collecting firewood and fetching water, all of that. Not that it's not true. Actually, it's very true, and it's still the daily burden of millions, hundreds of millions of women in the global south. But I found it, what disturbs me is that I found it reductionist, because it distracts from the real structural issues that caused that situation, and that also perpetuate the situation. And I'm talking about, all the colonial disruptions in people's livelihoods, the disruptions of social and ecological networks, the imposed economic models, all of that contribute to maintaining those access deficit contexts. So having just, snippets where, okay, reduce undue burden of women and all of that, I found it um, reductionist. Yeah. So key message, let me wrap up quickly here. First key message, beware of the single story. And we see that the net zero scenario is an emerging one. It signals a new economy. But I put here a quote from Marie Baptiste, an indigenous scholar, who critiques Eurocentrism as a as a perceived and alleged monopoly of knowledge. And she uses that phrase that I found beautiful, that Eurocentrism uh, posits itself as both the doctor and the disease. And this is my second key message. The disease cannot be the doctor. And now I take you to Nancy Fraser, a justice scholar who says that there are inherent contradictions in capitalist models, and their capitalism in itself is prone to environmental crisis because of the perpetual look for sites of accumulation, of capital accumulation. And if we're using the same structures that led to socioeconomic oppression to reinvent magically themselves and bring solutions, uh, we may just be fooling ourselves. And my last message is this one. Again, as I said before, justice is really the compelling reason to pay attention, to look for those blind spots in the current energy transition. And as we unpack the energy system in subcomponents, it it gives more opportunities to look and to see those blind spots, because as we highlight the cost and opportunities of the energy transition, we will reduce the risk of having a transition that simply shifts inequalities instead of eliminating them. So this is what I had for you this morning. Thanks again for having me. And I just wanted to take a look at some of the shades in this energy transition, because ultimately, all of us, we are all sharing of just one dish, and we should make it work with one spoon. So thank you very much. And now I would very much like to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Carelle. That was fantastic. I think, I mean, it's a weird situation with Zoom, but round of applause. We've got some kind of hand clap emojis coming up here. Hopefully that will kind of satisfy for the need of applause. That was really interesting, really great stuff. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Either raise your hand or pop them in the chat. I need to get everyone up here. Carelle, could you perhaps stop sharing your screen?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Sorry.
And that'll. Do we have any questions? It may take a little. Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, is that Teresia?
Yeah, Betty, you can call me Betty. So thank you so much, Carelle, for your presentation. It was great. I'm actually doing, research as well on the gender in the energy transition in G7 countries and ASEAN countries. So I read your paper. It was really interesting. It's really interesting. And I just have, I'm wondering when you were doing this research in terms of gender in that area, in this, let's say in this energy sector, what have you observed in a way that, would you say that the role of the women at this moment in the energy transition is still, is still lack, I mean, there is a lack of women involvement in the energy transition, or it's actually now is moving forward, as in like, there is more involvement in the energy transition? Because what I've seen from your presentation earlier, even in the IEA, in the outlook for the net zero pathway, they only mentioned women for twice, where the UN SDG goal, there is gender equality and also inclusiveness of the, no one left behind. So what do you think about that?
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Teresia. That's a great question, because it speaks to what I found as being a contradiction. So there is, if you look at figures, numbers of women in renewable energy jobs, yes, there are more. The numbers are increasing, but then when you dive deeper into the numbers, you'll see that they may be into administrative roles, or they may, there are you have a few engineers, and they're also growing numbers, but still what is lacking is women in leadership roles, where they can actually decide how those systems are implemented, how the energy system is designed. There is a difference. It's like either you set the table and then you invite me after the fact, or you invite me to cook and set up the party. So the situation, in my view, where we are now is that, yeah, the table is there, and yeah, you're welcome to join. Yeah, if you can get there, yeah, you're welcome to join. But are they, are those women do they have a seat at the tables where decisions are made before the system is rolled out? And that's where, until that happens, those inequities will continue for a long time, because there's unless you have enough people at the table to design anything, the people present will only go so far, because that's what they see. And if they don't see me, they will not make room for me in the system. And that's the problem I'm seeing. Yes, you can come, and the company's there. We're not saying you cannot join. I mean, join if you can. You're welcome to join. And that's a big difference for me. And the shift needs to happen in the steering. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's clear to me. Thank you, Carelle. It was great. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great question, Teresia. Thank you. Or Betty, sorry. We've got a few questions in the chat now, Carella. So maybe we could go to Shivani. Shivani, do you want to turn your mic on and ask your question directly?
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I really liked it. And I think as we move very rapidly, as you said, within a span of 9 years, energy justice is going to be key. Otherwise, we're going to be sort of repeating the same mistakes that we have in the past. And so I was just wondering if in your sort of observation research so far, if you have a sense of the percentage of women in the coal mining space who need to be transitioned, and that's one aspect of it. And I think you've spoken to it partly, but I'd like to hear more. And if you've already heard from any conversations, anecdotal or otherwise, to understand where they stand with respect to where they see themselves even if they've not been given agency, it could be through informal conversations or otherwise. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you're asking about coal, because I've been hearing about coal. This is the third time I've been, I'm getting involved in conversations about coal. I haven't done any research of my own on coal. I know nothing about number of women. I just know that traditionally there are less women in the fossil fuel industry than in the renewable. And that's one of the arguments, saying that, well, renewable energy jobs will bring more opportunities for women. So traditionally, I know there even less women there. I have no idea of the number. I'm very sorry. I don't have any number. What I've heard yesterday or 2 days ago, a talk by Kirsten Jenkins, who's speaks. She's a prolific author in energy justice, and she's doing work currently on coal communities in the UK, in Scotland, I believe. If that's something you're interested in, she might have. She didn't say anything to gender differentiation in her work, but because she looks at energy communities, she might have. But I cannot. I'm sorry, I cannot be more helpful. I haven't looked at coal at all.
No, that's all right. But your paper was interesting, so I'll probably look at the reference you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
Kirsten Jenkins. And she's all over the place when you look at the energy justice, and she's doing work on coal communities.
Thank you so much. I will look her up.
You're very welcome.
Brilliant. Got another couple of questions here. So we've got a question from Mayas. Mayas, do you want to say yours directly?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Carelle, for your talk. That was very interesting. I had a question. You sort of alluded to this when you spoke about your general research interests, but do you have any thoughts or things you noticed about the intersections between Indigenous sovereignty and women's agencies in the energy transition movement? And I'm sorry, I was about to type a second question, but I was like, well, they're getting called on. my second question is related to, I don't know if you have any thoughts on if there is a dilemma between increasing women's, agency in energy transition movements, and whether some energy jobs are sort of the result of, the global north exploiting resources in the global south. So, for example, jobs in like mineral mining and things like that. And if there is sort of a juxtaposition between those two thoughts and goals. So yeah, those are my two questions. I hope I vocalize them properly.
Yeah, well, the first one, let me speak to the first one and maybe we can come back to the second one. So yes, there are definitely, and I'm seeing that more and more, intersections between um, women agency and indigenous sovereignty. There is, especially here, and not only here in Canada, indigenous women are very vocal because the 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 way they look at oppression is very holistic. So there's a beautiful, oh, I should have put that in that. There's a beautiful illustration by an indigenous artist where the artist locates. So it's a drawing of a female body where the sites of extraction of fossil fuel extractions are in the tummy, the belly of the woman. So there is a strong, it's a very strong mind picture because the way I've heard indigenous scholars and activists describe is that it is the same whether you oppress the family or you oppress the land. It all comes back to the same because ultimately you're dispossessing people of the very source of livelihood, the things that makes them them is destroyed. So it's the same whether a bullet or destruction of the land comes back to the same, and it results in loss of sovereignty, whether it's at the physical level, at the individual level, the community level, or a broader in broader context when you look at whole communities or countries. So there is definitely overlaps and intersection. Now, your second question, could you repeat that, please?
Yes, thank you for the answer for the first one. Yeah, I guess I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on, this like need to increase women's roles and agencies in the renewable energy transition movement, and if there's any sort of dilemma or conflict between like whether some of these roles or jobs are sort of a result of like the exploitation of the global south by the global north. So like, for example, would you see this in like mineral mining jobs or things like that for materials for like making solar panels and things like that, if that makes sense, or like batteries, for example?
I'm not sure I'm in a position to give you an intelligent answer to this one. What I've read is um, that the roles at the moment, the roles that women have in the renewable energy sector are, don't want to say menial jobs, but they don't get up there in the ladder of leadership. In extraction sites, and the two cases I've looked at for that paper were lithium extraction in the lithium triangle, so that's Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, and cobalt in the DRC. And in both cases, so yeah, women get job. So they take the jobs that they can have, and they take the jobs, not necessarily the jobs that they want or the jobs that they're qualified for, although it's in rural communities, and oftentimes, it's not often that you will have skilled people, either men or women, but they're taking the jobs that they can have to improve their livelihood. So it limits, if you're poverty stricken, or if you just want to eat, you'll take what you get in many cases. And I haven't seen in extraction sites indication of women in advantageous position. But again, these are only two cases studies that are these only two cases that I've looked at. um, I've also seen, especially in the case of the lithium triangle, that while some women are getting job, other women are actually resisting extraction because of the damage on water resources. The mining practices are degrading the water resources, and those areas are already dry and arid, so it makes their livelihood worse. So you may have some who are able to get jobs, but as a community, at the community level, I haven't seen indication of communities being made to thrive from those activities. But again, I haven't looked enough to give you any intelligent answer.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for your answers. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Brilliant. Thanks both. We've got a question from Katie, who says, unfortunately, she's her microphone's not working at the moment. So she says, thank you, Carelle, brilliant presentation. Can you please speak at all to where or what you think energy research or researchers should focus on in the coming years? It's more of a kind of, that's a big challenging question there. What should we focus on, Carelle?
Ooh, everything, all those shades, so many shades, so many things to look at. Well, if I were to start my PhD, which I'm not going to do, if I were to start a new PhD next fall, I would look at net zero. I would look at the intricacies of the scenario and the winners and the potential winners and losers. Not even potential, because already there are things coming that are already obvious at the moment. So I would, but there's so many shades. Yeah, there's so many things. I think net zero is gonna be high in the news for a while.
Brilliant, thanks. Hopefully that answered your question, Katie. We've got another question as well from Sebastian. Sebastian, do you want to turn on your mic?
Hi. Well, my question was about the gender issues that you observed in the renewable energy sectors. So my question was rather about, is it something general we find in engineering sectors, in technological sectors, or do you think there is something specific about the renewable energy in terms of gender and justice and so on? Thank you.
Well, it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. So my background is in engineering. So I did my bachelor and master in chemical engineering. And yeah, it's STEM is, and I have to say chemical engineering was even more generous for women. We were one of the fields with more more girls, I think, than other engineering fields. But yeah, the STEM, the gender ratio that you find in STEM disciplines is it's even worse when you get to the to energy jobs. So it was the same in the fossil fuel industry. Less women, very few women working there, and for all kinds of reasons. You know, if you have to be on a rig, offshore, all of that, and there's also attrition as years go by because women can enter. And actually, in the Middle East, I've read that there are more girls in STEM, so they do very well in school, but then there's a bottleneck at hiring level because some companies are still, we don't want to have them. She'll get pregnant in 2 years. That's going to be a waste of time, waste of money. So they may do very well in school, and then they are not able to get the jobs that they want, and they may end up in administrative role rather than technical roles. And even for the ones who get to these technical jobs, they may not be able to get the promotions that they want. So maybe after a while they you say, what's the point, and you leave for other positions. So it's not specific to renewable energy, but I want to say that renewable energy is maybe better than fossil fuel industry, looking at the numbers, but no, the inequities do not start with renewable energy sector. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Lovely, that's great. Do we have any more questions? We've run out on the chat, but if anybody would like to get a question in, we've still got a little bit of time.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Hello, can I
Yes.
do a follow-up question from Sebastian?
Yeah, go ahead, Betty. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Peter. So according to your response, then, Carelle, that seems that the element of the distributional justice is not really there yet for women.
In which sector are you talking about?
In renewable, both in renewable, in, let's say, in both sector, renewable or fossil fuel industry.
The way, and there are many ways to look at distributional justice, but the ways I engage with distributional justice is on a more contextual level. For example, in the project that I work on, in the community I work with, what I would label aspects of distributional justice would be the allocation of benefits, for example. So there is a wind project and revenues are generated. Who gets a share of the benefit? How are those benefits shared? So I think your question is at the broader level. And if you could think of benefits of that clean energy transition as a whole on society. And again, just to clarify, if your idea of benefits is, if you equate distributional justice to benefit allocation and you think about benefits to women, I think I would say yes and no, because in areas, for example, one of the case studies in the paper looks at rural, I think I forgot the province in China. It's a rural area in China where renewable energy was introduced. So there are positive aspects of renewable energy introduction in that community, that particular community, because it reduced drudgery for women. So women who had to spend hours fetching wood, for example, with a biodigester at home, they don't have to do that as much. So in that sense, there are benefits. I'm not saying there are no benefits. There are benefits. There are also other studies that say, well, if you have a solar panel, maybe the women will benefit or maybe not. So there are conflicting stories, but in general, I have to say that improving or reducing the deficit in energy access brings benefit to women because it allows them to engage in activities that they wouldn't do otherwise, whether it's reducing their workload or protecting them. If you have to walk long hours to fetch wood, I mean, you're subject to all kinds of, their incidents of sexual aggression, all of that, sexual violence. So yes, there are definitely benefits to women. But there are, what benefits there, you might have benefits for some women in one place and then problems to other women in another place. So for example, and just a quick example, like one case of lithium extraction in Latin America shows women who see that we don't have water to drink because those companies are mining lithium. So for them, renewable energy is a disaster because the only piece that they see is, I don't have any more water to drink. But the solar panels and the batteries built from that lithium enabled other women elsewhere to have access to energy. So, see, that's why I'm saying there are benefits. It's yes and no. It's a tricky question. Thank you for tricking me, Theresia.
No, it's good. I mean, like, it's interesting. You give me new perspective as well, and I think you are correct. Sometimes it's just hard to do justice for the global world in terms of energy transition. There's always someone or people that will suffer. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Betty. I think we've got time for one more question, and that's from Alexander. If you've got enough energy there, Carelle, for one more. So, Alexander, do you want to try and turn on your mic, or I can read it out if not? I think we heard you, but then you disappeared. I don't know.
Well, the question, I think I see, you said Alexander, so I see the question. So he's saying, do you mind, Peter, if I just read it? Okay. I was wondering, isn't the growing importance of women and indigenous people in renewable energy the symptom that in a system that is mostly patriarchal and Eurocentric, renewable energies are not taken seriously by economic actors? Okay, I don't know. You probably didn't mean what I'm reading. Okay, so you may want, because what I'm reading is, again, what I am understanding as I read is the fact that women and indigenous people are becoming important in renewable energies because renewable energy is not taken seriously. So I'm torn in my mind because I see two directions to this question. If you, I see two directions, and one direction is disturbing me. So I want to try to speak to the other direction that I see. I wouldn't say that renewable energy is not taken seriously. I think that structures are just heavy. There's a lot of inertia in politics and in incumbent system, to use a term that is used in the energy transition field. Incumbent systems are the established systems, and there's a lot of inertia. So they're, to move and to shift and to disrupt, it takes a lot of energy, and probably women, indigenous people, and other groups that were marginalized in the incumbent system are shaking that system to see change. I don't think that renewable energy is not taken seriously, and as a matter of fact, the net zero scenario shows that it's a strong political signal that we want to take it more seriously. That's why we will probably have to extract more minerals than we used to. So to me, it's a sign that they are now taking renewable energy seriously. My concern is actually the opposite, because now the incumbent regime, the established regimes, is ready to shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy. How much will that cost? Because if they keep the practices that they had for centuries, because I'm talking about capitalism, if those same practices are allowed to continue, we're going to have a different conversation in 3 decades. So I'm not sure I captured your question. So I picked one direction. I don't know what was your actual intent.
I think you did a great job.
Thank
you.
Well,
well, I think that probably closes things up. Thank you so much, Carelle, for this. That has been an absolutely fantastic, fascinating talk, and yeah, I've been looking forward to hearing this for a little while. And so Alexander says, very sad, very sorry for the bad formulation, but your response was excellent. So
you're very kind, Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. Just quickly, a reminder that to sign up for next week's webinar with Jenny Stevens, who's going to be talking to us about her book. It's set to be another great talk, so please do come along. Again, you can RSVP on a website on the events pages. We hope to see you all there and continue some of these conversations next week and over the coming weeks. Carelle, thanks again. Round of applause. It's been great hearing from you, and clearly, yeah, resonated very well with a lot of people. So thank you.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay, and the recording of this will be available online shortly as well. Okay. Well, take care, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next week. And yeah, have a great afternoon and weekend.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.